Afternoon and welcome to the Car and Car Monthly Info viewing today. My name is Wilson White. I am one of the attorneys here at Car and Car in our Tulsa office, and I'm honored to have one of my brothers from the Oklahoma City office here because we do cover statewide, and I would like to introduce everybody to Ryan Dexter. Ryan, why don't you say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Ryan has been with us since about mid-November. He brings a huge amount of experience in the Social Security disability field. He's been practicing 13 years, and 11 of those have been concentrated in Social Security statewide. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
I actually grew up in Missouri, went to college there at Missouri Southern State University in Joplin. I then went to law school in Oklahoma City,
Okay.
where I took the bar, got licensed here, and did a couple years just doing general civil stuff, family law, personal injury type work. But then I ended up deciding I wanted to move back to Missouri for a while, and that's where I got involved and started getting experience with disability law. So since then, I practiced in Missouri for several years doing disability, and then moved back down to Oklahoma, and have been practicing here in Oklahoma for the last 8 years here in Oklahoma. And I've done thousands of these types of cases all over the country.
Great. And that's one thing about the Social Security law field is it's not like a car wreck where if you had it in Tulsa County, you have to file in Tulsa County. So it's not unusual to be able to have a statewide. Also with Oklahoma, we have Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas. So, it's really in the federal system. So Ryan can basically come to you any place, anytime with the electronics of everything. So Ryan, why don't you give us some overview and what basically qualifies someone for disability benefits?
Well, generally, for adults, what we're looking at is somebody's ability to engage in what they call substantial gainful activity. Now, that's just kind of fancy legal speak for can you work a full-time job, or can you work enough to make a certain amount of money? If you're unable to, due to an injury or an illness that's keeping you from being able to kind of work that full-time job, then you may be entitled to disability benefits.
Okay. Now, on the full-time job, I've always gotten kind of confused. Is that any full-time job? Or, for example, if you were a welder and they find you putting paper clips together, is that still full-time, or does it have to be kind of in your field and your expertise?
They look at any job. Now, as you get older, someone might have been that welder and might have which is a more physically demanding job. Now, when you're between the ages of 18 to 49, they want to see that you can't do any full-time job. So even if it's sitting there, taking phone calls or inspecting things, but as you age and get older, over the age of 50 and even more so over 55, if you have physical impairments that are keeping you from doing the kind of work that you used to do, and you don't have any skills that get you down into some of those lighter, easier jobs, then maybe you could do a sit-down job full-time, but because of your age, the law recognizes that it's harder for people as they age to transition into doing different careers.
Sure. Kind of hard to teach an old dog new tricks.
Exactly. It's a good way to put it.
Now, you said 18 to 49. Is there kind of I know there's no like bright line, where you're above or below, but is there kind of a line of demarcation, so to speak, that if you go over that line, it's easier to get as opposed to, for example, younger people?
Yes, the bar kind of gets lowered when you turn 50.
Okay.
But again, it's going to depend on what you did.
Mm-hmm.
If the work that you used to do was like a sit-down job where it wasn't very physically demanding or anything like that, then Social Security may expect you to be able to do a similar job. But for some people, it might be yeah, physically they could do that, but mentally they can't. So
Sure.
it really depends on what it is. But if it's a physical in nature, it is easier for people over the age of 50, and then even more so, like I said, 55. They always rate kind of how much you can do. Like, are you capable of doing heavy work, medium work, light work, sedentary work? But as long as if you're over 50 or 55, if it precludes you from doing your past work and you're limited to that sedentary or light range of work, and you don't have any skills to transfer into that, then it makes it a lot easier.
Okay. And before we jump into some kind of some criteria or some things we look at and why to hire an attorney, can you give us just kind of a quick overview, the difference between, let's say, being 55 and getting on Social Security disability versus waiting till you're 65 and getting on Social Security retirement?
Right. So obviously, Social Security was kind of set up to take care of you as you get older. It's set up for retirement, but not everybody makes it to retirement age before they get sick or injured and can't work. So that's where the disability program comes into play. And depending on the program that you're eligible for, so if you have worked in the past and you've paid in enough of your Social Security taxes to get enough work credits and you're insured for SSDI, then you can get a benefit that's based off what you paid in. And it'll be fairly similar. I mean, you know, give or take a little from kind of what you would get if you were at full retirement. And then basically as you get older on disability, once you hit that full retirement age, it's just retirement. It's no longer disability anymore.
Okay, so basically it's a bridge.
Correct.
It's a bridge from age, say, 55 to get you to 65. You're getting disability, and then at 65, it just clicks over onto the retirement stage and everything.
Correct. Yeah, and that's with regards to the SSDI program. There is another program called SSI where might be you don't have enough credits to qualify for SSDI and you're very limited means. You can get SSI, but if you have paid in and maybe you're eligible for that early retirement, which is a payment that's at a lower rate, Social Security generally, if you're on SSI, will make you switch over to your early retirement.
Right. One thing I always wanted to talk about here, just briefly, and I've done a few Social Security cases in my 30 years, but I know there's a lot of good, hardworking people that have jobs that they don't necessarily pay into the system. Construction people, seasonal, horticulture, things like that. And I have found that what happens is if you haven't been paying into the system, you were 1099 or independent contractor, you can find yourself not qualifying for Social Security disability. And these are people then realize they're not going to get maybe $1,500 a month. They might get $400 a month, and that's going to be really huge. Do you give any advice as to people as they get older to make sure they're paying into the system?
Yeah, I mean, you know, regardless of whether you get paid cash or you get 1099s, my advice would be go ahead and file your taxes every year, because that will pop up as self-employment, and you can get work credits for that self-employment. Okay. If you're reporting it, you can still get your work credits. And there's people, you know, sometimes who operate, they might run their own business, right. And you know, while they're in business, it's great. They kind of operate at a loss and do some tax avoidance there, and sure. Later on that can hurt them a lot when they're no longer to carry on. I unfortunately represent a lot of good, hardworking farmers who, you know, just the way they do accounting on the business, sure. Never ended up paying in. Right. And so when they become unable to work and work the farm, they're looking at having to sell the family farm and sure. Equipment and things like that just to get on SSI for a very small amount of money each month. So, you know, I would say, you know, while avoiding taxes sometimes is good, later on it can bite you.
Sure, and sometimes paying a little will clearly help out a lot down the road.
Correct.
Ryan, so why don't you go over some thoughts with us as why someone should hire an attorney to handle their disability claim?
I would say just because it is actually so complex. I mean, it's not just necessarily can you work or not. A lot of it has to deal with your age, your education, your work history. And some people may not have even worked, but they may actually qualify for a program that Social Security has that they're not just necessarily going to volunteer to you when you go down there to file. And I think consulting with an attorney at the beginning of the process is helpful, because we can evaluate your life situation. For instance, there are programs that are called Disabled Adult Child,
okay,
which is where if somebody is disabled between the ages of 18 and 22, they're not married, and their parents, one of their parents is either on Social Security, whether it be disability or retirement, or passed away, and their parents worked, they can actually get the higher benefit based off their parents' earnings history. Now, if somebody has never worked, generally they're going down and they're applying for SSI. Social Security is not necessarily going to volunteer that information to you that you might qualify for that program. So it's good sometimes to consult with an attorney up front, because you could make you could have a substantially higher benefit each month if you apply for the right program. Same thing goes for widows. If somebody's disabled and they're over the age of 50 and they have a spouse that has passed away, it's very possible they may qualify for disability widows benefits, where maybe their spouse made a lot more money than them, and so their payment may be higher. And that can be true even if you divorced that spouse and you weren't married to them anymore at the time they passed away.
Sure. And on the divorce, is there a period where they look back, like if somebody was married for 15 years and then had been divorced for 10 years, would they still qualify? Or
if it's somebody who was no longer married to their spouse, we're talking about an ex-spouse, usually we're looking at they have to have been married for at least 10 years.
Okay.
They can't have remarried.
Okay.
So if they're not married, they've been married 10 years, and they're at the age of 50 and and they're disabled, then they can get that benefit.
Okay.
Now, the disability has to have begun within 7 years of the death of the spouse, though.
Okay. And those are the things, it sounds like Social Security is not going to necessarily, nice people that bend over backwards to tell you what you can and can't do and everything like that. What about the paperwork? What do you find on that?
Well, the paperwork can be very confusing, and it can be very, and they hit you with a lot of paperwork, and sometimes they'll send you the same paperwork over and over again. It's good to have somebody who can explain why they're sending that to you, kind of what it's for. Some paperwork, the attorney will have you fill it out because Social Security wants to kind of hear it in your words. Sure. What's wrong with you? What can you do? What can you not do? Because it helps them understand how you're limited versus just reading medical records.
Okay.
But it can be very confusing because they do send lots of questionnaires. They do require a lot of things to be signed and things like that. The other thing is to keep track of the paperwork.
Right.
If you file, they might send you a letter saying, hey, you've been denied, or hey, we need this paperwork, we need this thing we asked you for within 10 days. Those are things sometimes that can get lost in the mail. Sure. The daily shuffle. You just might have accidentally threw it in the trash, not realizing it was from Social Security. Right. And there's a strict timeline. If you're denied, you only get 60 days to appeal these things.
Absolutely.
And so it's good to kind of have somebody who's going to get that same paperwork, because if you retain an attorney, Social Security is supposed to send notices to your representative as well. And so if we receive it, we're calling the client and saying, hey, you got denied. Let's get your appeal going now.
Okay. We've got some questions that have come in. It looks like we've got Tammy from, it looks like the western part of the state, Oklahoma City. And what's that say? What is the difference between SSI and SSDI, Ryan?
Correct. So SSDI is the program that's based off of when you worked. As you work and pay in, if you make a certain amount of money, you get a work credit, and you get 4 credits a year. Okay. In order to be insured, it stands for Social Security Disability Insurance. So in order to be insured, you have to have worked basically at least 5 of the last 10 years, or getting 20 work credits out of the last 40 quarters. So that is the one that kind of pays the higher, and it's usually the better one, because you also, when you get approved for disability, you also get health benefits. You get the eligibility for Medicare or Medicaid, and so you also get the option for Medicare when you get SSDI. Now you have to, pay in a certain amount. You have to keep paying in. Otherwise, it's kind of like any other insurance. If you don't pay your premium, you aren't going to be covered.
Sure.
So that can happen. Usually, if somebody's fully insured, your coverage will last for about 5 years. But
Okay.
Again, it depends on how much you paid in. SSI, that stands for Supplemental Security Income. That's more based off of, it's more of a needs-based program. You still have to show you're disabled. All the same rules apply. It's just they look at your income and they look at assets. If you're married, they look at household income, what your spouse is bringing in, and really kind of any income from any source. And that really does, that unfortunately puts a lot of people in a pickle if they aren't insured under SSDI is the household income issue. Another thing is assets. If you own anything, there are some exceptions,
right.
But anything outside of one house that you live in one vehicle, anything of substantial value outside of that, they can deny you just because they say, hey, you've got this asset that you could sell and you need to exhaust that resource before we kick in.
Okay. We've got a question. Looks like Holly from the northeastern part of the state here. Why don't you read that one from Holly?
Holly says a close family member isn't able to work because of physical inabilities. She has been denied before. Would she be able to reapply? Yes. And you can reapply anytime because circumstances change. Sometimes people's conditions get worse, and at that point it may be severe enough that Social Security agrees, hey, yeah, you are disabled. Also, if it's something that if you refile within enough time, I know you said I said earlier within 60 days, if there's some good excuse or good cause as to why you didn't file in that 60 days, usually if we can refile within a year, sometimes we can get that original application reopened and get it appealed. But we have to give, a good cause as to why you missed that 60-day deadline.
Because otherwise you go back and have to get back in line at the back of the line, basically.
Yeah, well, you have to get in the back of the line, but also when it's important when we're talking back pay,
right?
Because from the time you apply until they ultimately approve you, there's months that go by, and that's you get a big chunk of money at the end that's called back pay. Mm-hmm. They with SSI that goes from your application date. With SSDI, they can go back a little further. Like let's say you became disabled 2 years ago,
okay,
and you filed today, and they agree, yeah, you were disabled 2 years ago. They won't necessarily pay you back 2 years, but they will pay you at least up to 12 months prior to the date you applied. So they could give you 12 months from now.
Sure.
So it is important sometimes to reopen that case to try to get your back pay. It's also important for purposes of calculating your Medicare coverage.
Because there's a waiting period in there for Medicare, is that correct?
Correct. There's from the date of your disability, that's what we call your alleged onset date. From that onset date, once you're approved, they look at that onset date, and it's 2 years and 5 months from the time that you became disabled before you're eligible for Medicare coverage.
So the good news is some of those people can get approved and start receiving money. But in some cases, the bad news is they still have to wait a year or so, depending on the facts, before they have any health insurance.
That's correct.
Okay, and that can be a hardship in and of itself.
It can be, but there are some other programs, through the state that might be able to fill in that gap.
Okay.
There's things like Insure Oklahoma and things that you can, try to pursue to at least have some kind of health care coverage in the meantime.
And you also have that experience and that knowledge that you can kind of help direct people to those areas.
Right. That's something I would direct people to. I mean, I don't necessarily represent people in helping them get that, but I do have enough knowledge I can point you in the right direction to give you some possible resources that you might be able to take advantage of while you're waiting.
Great. Just further reasons to hire an attorney.
Correct.
And we have another question down there.
Let's see. It's got, let's see.
We can go down further.
Okay. How long after a denial can I reapply? Well, after a denial, really, you wouldn't want to reapply. You would want to appeal within 60 days.
Okay.
But if you miss that 60 days, you can reapply whenever. There's no waiting period.
Sure. And how much does it cost to apply?
Zero.
Free, right?
It's absolutely free.
There's an ad now about tax time, and the lady's reading back. She's a court reporter, and the answer is free. Free,
Right.
free.
Right.
And it's free to call and it's free to file, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
You see, we have another question. How long does it Social Security?
How long does the Social Security claim generally take? That depends. Some cases can get approved based on their application. They can get approved, within 3 months, depending on the severity of their condition, or if they meet, one of the listings and it's very obvious. Some claims can take years. If they keep getting denied, and I've had cases that actually went on for 7 years, because it's something where they went through all their appeals. We ended up having to go into federal court to fight it, and it got sent back from appeal, and then we kind of had to go through another hearing, and it went back and forth on several appeals before we ultimately were able to be successful on it. But the nice thing is that whole time you're fighting it, you're still building that back pay.
Sure. And again, the people aren't being charged every month. You're not sending them a bill every month.
Right.
You work on, can you explain that? Just the contingency fee.
Right. You work on a contingency fee, and that's actually set up by federal law. The Social Security regulations basically say an attorney can get 25% of whatever your back pay benefits are. Now, that does cap at $6,000. So we take the lesser of the two. So if your back pay was only $4,000, 25% is $1,000, we'll take that. If it went on a long time and Social Security owed you $40,000, $10,000 would be 25%, but we would only take $6,000.
Okay. Let's see here. I know that there is a high rate of denials. Why don't you kind of cover that real quick for us?
Right. There is a high rate of denials. And again, that goes back to why you may want an attorney. One, we can help track those denials and make sure that your appeals are done timely, because nobody wants to start the process over.
Sure.
Like you say, go to the back of the line again.
Mm-hmm.
The high rate of denials, there seems to be a kind of a stereotype I hear from a lot of people that say, oh, they just give disability away. I know somebody who gets disability and they can work. I would say, you might want to be careful unless you've actually read that person's medical records before you jump to that conclusion. And you wouldn't want anybody to say that about you. And so it's good to have an attorney to evaluate it, what your conditions are. But there is a very high rate of denials, and that's gone up over the years. Here in Oklahoma, they used to be a lot more generous about approving cases as far as judges go. They would approve a lot more, but over the last 10 years, it's really, they're scrutinizing it more and more. If it's borderline, they're just going to deny it.
Sure.
So it's good to have an attorney to be able to help get the evidence we need. And when we do have to go in front of a judge and argue your case, we know what we're looking for and the things that we need to point out to the judge to show that, no, actually you do qualify.
Okay. And let's see here. We've been going on for a little while. Let me see if, do you need to be denied before talking to an attorney?
No, you don't need to be denied. Again, that's why I say you want to start, sometimes you probably want to consult with an attorney. You don't have to consult with an attorney to apply for it. But generally it's a good idea because, like I said before, we may be able to point you in the direction of a program that may benefit you more with Social Security as opposed to just applying for it online and not realizing that maybe there was a different disability program with Social Security that might benefit you more.
Okay.
And again, we can help track those denials so that your case keeps moving along.
And the other thing I have found, Ryan, for a lot of these people, this is their first rodeo. And for you, you've been doing this, you said 10 years, 1,000 times. So obviously you've got pretty good, at least got a pretty good experience factor. You've probably seen a little of everything.
I have seen a little bit of everything, but I always run into new cases and new stories and new challenges. And the law is constantly changing too. There are different things that change as far as, how much is the SGA level? I mean, that changes with the cost of living year to year.
SGA again
is substantial gainful activity. This year, if somebody can't work a job and make at least $1,260 a month, that is what we call substantial gainful activity. So it's not necessarily that full-time 40-hour-week job. I mean, that's what we look at when we're in the courtroom.
Right.
But when you apply, if you're working and you're making close to that that or more, it's going to be a technical denial. They won't even look at what your medical problems are.
Okay. As we're kind of winding up here, any other good questions there?
This is what kinds of options are available for families with disabled children? The option as far as Social Security goes generally is you're looking at SSI because children haven't really worked, they haven't paid in anything. They look at SSI, and for some families that can be a little bit difficult because it may be a situation where mom and dad they work and their income may be so much that it would prevent them from getting any SSI because, like I said, it is a needs-based program and they look at income and resources. But if the family does meet that limited means test, then SSI is the way to go. And then there's some people who may have, like I said earlier, disabled adult children between the ages of 18 and 22. If one of those parents is drawing Social Security, it may be something we can get them a benefit based off of their work history.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we really appreciate your time today and chiming in with us. We do this either monthly or kind of about every other month. We are very excited to have Ryan here with us. I hope you have realized that some people have a extra special passion for what they do, and I would definitely put Ryan Dexter into that category. He's been doing it 11 years. He's got 1,000 cases under his belt. He knows the law. He knows the judges, and he really cares. And you can just tell that the way it comes through, the knowledge that comes out of him. I'm kind of in awe sitting here because I've done a few of those cases, but we really appreciate you chiming in today. And again, I want to stress, it's free to call, it's free to file, and that could be the best call you've ever made is to Car and Car. Ryan's in our Oklahoma City office, but he travels to Tulsa quite a bit. We cover the statewide. Some of the areas, Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, don't let that preclude you. Give us a call. We're here for you. Ryan, any final salutations of signing off today?
No, just I'm really excited to be a part of Car and Car, and glad to bring my knowledge and experience to the table to help people in their need for disability, because it can be a daunting process, and a lot of people get stretched emotionally and financially through the process. And if I can be there to help alleviate that stress of navigating it, it's a good feeling.
And that's actually what you absolutely want in an advocate. And we thank you for your time today. You guys have a great day. Be careful out there.